Rain poured over the red soil of Kogi as Amara stood still beside her father's casket. Her black dress clung to her skin, her face empty of emotion. The priest's voice echoed faintly through the heavy air until the family lawyer cleared his throat. "Before we bury Chief Adewale," he said, "there's something he wanted revealed." The crowd went silent. Amara's mother turned pale. The lawyer pulled out a sealed letter, opened it carefully, and began to read, "Your real father is still alive." Gasps filled the air. For a moment, the world stopped moving. Amara felt her knees weaken. Her mother's eyes widened in shock. Then, from outside the church gate, a black SUV rolled to a stop. The engine hummed like a warning. A tall man in a dark suit stepped out, his face wet from the rain, or maybe from tears. In his trembling hand, he held an old photograph of a baby girl. Amara's breath caught. It was her. The man looked straight at her, his lips quivering, his eyes full of pain and longing. The murmurs grew louder as people turned to watch him walk toward the crowd. Amara couldn't move. Her heart pounded, her mind spinning with questions. Who was this man? Why now? The lawyer stepped back, unsure what to do. The man stopped at the edge of the grave, his voice low but steady. "I came to say goodbye," he said. "To the man who raised my daughter." The world around Amara blurred as her mother's body hit the wet ground with a heavy thud. People rushed to help, shouting her name, but Amara couldn't move. Her hands trembled. Her ears rang. Everything felt distant, like she was trapped inside a dream she couldn't wake from. The whispers grew louder, rising like waves through the crowd. "Is this a joke?" someone said. "What's happening?" another voice asked. The rain kept falling, cold and merciless, soaking through her hair and clothes. The man in the dark suit didn't flinch. His eyes never left the coffin. Slowly, he stepped forward, ignoring the gasps and stares around him. Each step sounded heavier than the last. He stopped beside the casket, placed a shaking hand on it, and whispered, "Forgive me, Adewale, for raising your daughter in silence." The words cut through the air like thunder. A deep hush fell over everyone. Amara felt her heart twist painfully. Raising your daughter, she thought, her breath catching in her throat. The man turned toward her then, his eyes full of regret and love. "Amara," he said quietly. The sound of her name on his tongue made her freeze. That voice, it wasn't new. It was the same one that used to call her name in her dreams when she was a little girl, the one she could never place. She stared at him, her lips trembling. Memories she didn't understand flashed in her mind, an unfamiliar laugh, a man lifting her up in the sunlight, the smell of smoke and soap. Her mother, now conscious but weak, began to cry softly, shaking her head. "No, not here," she whispered. "Please, not now." But the truth was already out. The guests watched in stunned silence, afraid to breathe too loud. Amara's chest tightened. The world she knew, her family, her name, her story, suddenly felt like a lie. She took a step back, her voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" The man's lips trembled. "I'm your father," he said. "Your real father." The ground beneath her seemed to vanish. She stared at him, wanting to scream, wanting to run, but all she could do was stand there, shaking. Around them, the whispers started again, faster, sharper. Her real father? After all these years? But Chief Adewale? Amara felt her world collapse. The coffin in front of her now felt like a symbol of everything she'd lost, the father she'd buried, the truth she'd been denied. Her mother covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably. The man stepped closer, but Amara held up her hand. "Don't," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't come near me." Rain poured harder, thunder echoing in the distance. Amara looked at the two people she thought she knew best, one gone forever, the other hiding the biggest secret of her life. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered to herself, "This isn't just a secret, it's a betrayal." And in that moment, under the dark Kogi sky, Amara realized her life would never be the same again. That night, the house was quiet except for the sound of rain hitting the windows. Everyone had left after the chaos at the funeral, but Amara couldn't sleep. Her heart felt heavy, her mind spinning with the image of the man who had called her name like he'd known her all his life. She needed answers. Slowly, she walked into her late father's study, the room that always smelled like old books and cologne. The lights flickered as she searched through drawers, looking for anything that could make sense of what had happened. Behind a stack of dusty files, she found a small wooden box wrapped in an old scarf. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were photographs, faded but still clear enough to tell their story. Her mother was smiling in every one, looking younger, freer, and standing beside the same man who had appeared at the funeral. His arm was around her, his eyes soft, his smile full of love. Amara's breath caught when she flipped one photo over. Written in careful handwriting were the words, "To my heart, forever ours, Femi." Amara froze. Femi. The name echoed in her mind. The man who showed up at the funeral wasn't just a stranger. He had once been a part of their family, her mother's secret. She stared at the photos again, tears forming in her eyes. How long had her mother hidden this? Why had she lied all these years? She marched down the hallway and pushed open her mother's bedroom door. Her mother was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her funeral clothes, eyes red from crying. When she saw the photographs in Amara's hand, her face went pale. "Where did you find those?" she asked, her voice shaking. "In his study," Amara said, holding up the pictures. "Who is he, Mama? Who is Femi?" Her mother's lips quivered. She tried to speak but no words came out. Finally, she covered her face and began to sob. "I wanted to tell you," she whispered. "But I couldn't." Amara stepped closer, her voice breaking. "You lied to me my whole life. You let me believe Chief Adewale was my father." Her mother looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He was your father in every way that mattered," she said. "But your real father, Femi, was taken from me. He was a political prisoner. They came for him because he spoke against the government. They told me he was dead. They threatened to hurt you if I didn't remarry." Amara felt the air leave her chest. Her mother reached for her hand. "I married Adewale to protect you," she said softly. "He loved you as his own. We both did." Amara looked at the photos again, her heart torn between anger and heartbreak. "So you both kept this from me," she whispered. Her mother nodded weakly. "We did it to keep you safe. But safety had come at a price, the truth. And now that Amara had found it, nothing would ever be the same again." Amara couldn't stop thinking about the photos and her mother's confession. The image of the man at the funeral, Femi, kept flashing in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, his tears, his voice calling her name. She was angry, hurt, and confused all at once. Part of her wanted to hate him for showing up and tearing her world apart. But another part of her wanted to know the truth. After days of silence, she finally agreed to meet him. They met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, away from curious eyes and gossiping mouths. The air was thick with tension. Femi sat by the window, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea he hadn't touched. When Amara walked in, he stood up immediately. His eyes softened, but she didn't smile. She sat across from him, folding her arms tightly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Femi reached into his bag and pulled out an old, leather-bound notebook. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. He slid it across the table toward her. "This belonged to Chief Adewale," he said quietly. Amara hesitated, then opened it. Her heart skipped when she saw the familiar handwriting. Her late father's words filled the pages, letters, dates, and short notes written like secret messages. She read one line aloud, her voice trembling, "Femi and I made our choice. She must live." Her eyes widened. "What does this mean?" she asked, looking up at him. Femi took a deep breath. "It means your fathers, both of us, made a pact," he said. "Years ago, there were powerful men who wanted to destroy our family. They wanted what your father built, and they would have stopped at nothing. We decided that you would be protected, no matter what. When they came for me, Adewale hid you and your mother. He raised you as his own because it was the only way to keep you safe." Amara stared at him, her hands shaking as she turned the pages. There were newspaper clippings, names, and coded notes. Her father had written about secret meetings, hidden accounts, and people watching their every move. Everything suddenly made sense, the fear in her mother's eyes, the guarded silence that surrounded their family. "You were never supposed to know," Femi continued, his voice breaking. "Not until it was safe. Adewale and I swore to protect you together. He was my brother in every way that mattered. When I heard he was gone, I couldn't stay hidden anymore." Amara looked at him, tears forming in her eyes. "So all this time, both of you were protecting me, and lying to me." Femi nodded slowly. "Sometimes love means keeping the truth locked away until the world can't use it to hurt you." Amara closed the notebook gently. She didn't know whether to cry or forgive him. But deep down, she felt something shift, a small, fragile understanding that love and sacrifice had always been at the center of her story. The next morning, Amara woke to the sound of shattering glass. Her heart jumped as she heard footsteps rushing through the hallway. 3 men dressed in black stormed into her home, their faces hidden behind masks. "Where is the notebook?" one of them shouted, throwing papers from her desk onto the floor. Amara froze, too shocked to speak. "We know you have it," another man yelled, pushing her against the wall. Fear rushed through her veins, but she refused to show it. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. The leader grabbed her chin, his voice low and cold. "If you value your mother's life, you'll find it." Then, just as quickly as they came, they vanished, leaving the house in chaos and Amara trembling in silence. She ran to her mother's room, calling her name over and over, but the bed was empty. The window was open, curtains blowing in the wind. Panic filled her chest. Her mother was gone. The phone on the nightstand buzzed, a message from an unknown number: "Don't involve the police if you ever want to see her again." Amara dropped the phone, her hands shaking. The truth Femi had shared was no longer just a story from the past, it was now alive, dangerous, and right inside her home. Desperate for answers, she went back to her father's study. She remembered the notebook, the cryptic notes, the warnings written in his own handwriting. Something in her told her there was more he had hidden. She started pulling books from the shelves, opening drawers, and checking under the desk. Behind a false panel, she found a stack of old bank documents wrapped in a brown envelope. Her breath caught as she flipped through them. Numbers. Signatures. Transfers. Billions of naira moved through fake companies, secret accounts, and offshore banks, all under her family's name. Tears filled her eyes as she realized what this meant. Her father, Chief Adewale, and her biological father, Femi, had been part of something much bigger, a web of power, politics, and corruption that had nearly destroyed them. But they weren't the villains. They had been framed, used as scapegoats in a massive conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. Her mother's disappearance wasn't random. It was a warning. They wanted the notebook because it contained the proof, the names of those involved. Amara's heart pounded as she clutched the envelope to her chest. Everything her fathers had tried to protect her from was now standing right at her door. For the first time, she understood why they had kept her in the dark. But it was too late for fear now. The truth was out, and if she wanted to save her mother, and herself, Amara knew she would have to face the very enemies her fathers had spent their lives hiding from. Amara spent the next few nights without sleep. The notebook, the stolen bank files, and her mother's sudden disappearance had turned her life into a nightmare. She sat on the floor of her father's study surrounded by papers, notebooks, and old envelopes. Every page she opened led to another secret, another lie. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous it all became. Her father's company, once known for charity and success, wasn't what it seemed. Hidden in between financial reports and letters, she found newspaper clippings from years ago. They spoke of a rebel group that had once challenged the government. In one of the faded photos, her heart skipped. There was her biological father, Femi, standing among men in military clothes, his face determined, his fist raised. She couldn't believe it. Her father, a rebel leader. And Chief Adewale, the businessman everyone admired, secretly funding the same group. It didn't make sense. She spread the papers out across the table and began connecting the dots. Chief Adewale's donations, his business trips, his missing funds, they all linked back to the same organization. Her fathers had been fighting the same corrupt leaders who now controlled the country. But the rebels had been betrayed from within. The government had turned them into villains to cover its own crimes. Amara's heart sank as the truth hit her. Her fathers weren't criminals, they were victims. Both had risked everything to protect her from the same people who had destroyed their lives. The men who broke into her house, the ones who took her mother, they were the same enemies who had hunted her fathers years ago. A sudden knock at the door startled her. She froze, holding her breath. "Amara, it's me," a voice said quietly. "Femi." She hesitated for a moment, then unlocked the door. He looked exhausted, his face worn from years of hiding. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but her voice cracked with emotion. "I had to come," he said softly. "They know you have the notebook. They won't stop until they destroy everything connected to it." Amara's hands trembled as she looked at him. "Why didn't you tell me the truth earlier? You were one of them, the rebels." He sighed deeply. "Yes. We fought for freedom, not power. But when the government turned against us, they killed most of my people. Adewale saved your mother and you. He gave up everything to keep you safe. You were never supposed to carry this burden." Amara's throat tightened. "And now they want to silence me too," she whispered. Femi nodded slowly. "They're afraid of you now. You carry both our names, both our legacies. That makes you powerful, and dangerous to them." Amara looked down at the notebook in her hands, her heart pounding. She realized she had no choice. The world that had haunted her fathers was now her own. To survive, she would have to trust the man she once feared, and become the woman they had both fought for her to be. The story reached its boiling point when Amara decided she couldn't run anymore. Enough of the lies, the hiding, and the fear. With Femi by her side, she gathered every piece of evidence her fathers had left behind, the notebook, the bank records, the old news articles, everything. Together, they built a case that could finally expose the truth. It wasn't just about her family anymore, it was about justice. For years, corrupt leaders had stolen billions from the people, silencing anyone who stood in their way. Now, their secrets were about to come to light. Femi and Amara walked into the courtroom with heavy hearts but steady steps. Cameras flashed from every corner. The case had drawn national attention, everyone wanted to see the mystery family whose story had shaken the country. On one side sat the powerful officials who had built their empires on lies. On the other sat Amara, the daughter they thought would stay silent. The trial began, and the lawyer who had first revealed the truth at her father's funeral now stood again. But this time, he wasn't carrying a sealed letter. He was carrying proof. One by one, he presented documents that revealed how government officials had used Chief Adewale's company to launder money, how Femi and his rebels had been framed as enemies, and how the deaths and disappearances that followed were all part of a plan to keep them quiet. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of papers being turned and gasps from the audience. Femi's face remained calm, but Amara could see the pain in his eyes. These were the same people who had stolen his life, his freedom, and his family. Yet now, they were finally being exposed. When it was Amara's turn to speak, she stood tall, her voice clear but emotional. "For years, my fathers were painted as traitors," she said. "But they were men who sacrificed everything to protect the truth and to protect me. Today, I carry both their names, not as a curse, but as a crown." Her words echoed through the hall. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. The crowd began to clap. By the end of the session, the evidence was undeniable. The officials were arrested, and the government promised a full investigation. The lawyer turned to the cameras and read the final statement: "By the will of Chief Adewale and by right of blood, Amara Adewale Femi is the rightful heir to both family estates." Tears streamed down her face as the room erupted in applause. Femi placed his hand gently on her shoulder and whispered, "They tried to bury the truth, but they forgot it was a seed." For the first time in her life, Amara smiled, not as a victim, but as the daughter of two men who had changed history. Months passed, but the memory of the courtroom still lived in every headline and every whispered conversation. Amara had become a symbol of courage, the woman who brought the truth to light and tore down decades of corruption. Yet behind all the attention, she remained quiet, still trying to heal from the storm that had consumed her life. The day finally came when she returned to where it all began, her father's grave. The red soil of Kogi was calm this time, kissed gently by the morning sun. She wore a simple white dress, the wind brushing her hair as she knelt before the gravestone. Her fingers traced the carved letters, and in a soft voice, she whispered, "I found the truth, and I finally found him." Behind her, slow footsteps approached. Amara didn't have to turn to know it was Femi. He walked carefully, holding a bouquet of white lilies in his trembling hands. His face carried both pride and pain, pride for the daughter he finally got to claim, and pain for the years lost to silence. He placed the flowers gently on Chief Adewale's grave, his voice breaking as he said, "Thank you, my brother, for loving her when I couldn't." For a long moment, they both stood in silence, the breeze carrying the scent of lilies and earth. The clicking of cameras soon followed as journalists gathered nearby. News outlets from across the country had come to witness the moment, the day history was rewritten. The once broken family that had lived in shadows now stood in the open, side by side. Amara looked up at Femi, then back at the grave. "He'd be proud," she said softly. Femi nodded, his eyes glistening. "No," he replied, smiling faintly. "He'd be at peace." The cameras flashed again, but Amara didn't flinch this time. She wasn't afraid of the world seeing her anymore. The truth that once shattered her had now become her strength. She had rebuilt both legacies, her father's business empire and the foundation she'd created in their names. The Amara Adewale Femi Foundation had already begun helping children without families, giving them homes, education, and hope. She wanted to make sure no child would ever grow up lost in secrets the way she had. As the journalists called her name, Amara turned and faced them, her voice calm but powerful. "Both my fathers fought for the truth," she said. "I'm just finishing what they started." The crowd fell silent. The camera lights glowed around her, and for the first time, she didn't feel torn between two worlds. She belonged to both. The daughter who once stood broken in the rain had become the woman who united two legacies, one of love, one of truth, into a single, unstoppable name, Amara Adewale Femi. The morning sun shone brightly over the small church in Kogi, the same one where Amara's life had shattered months before. The rain-soaked memories of that funeral still lingered in her mind, the whispers, the tears, the shock of the truth. But today was different. The same people who once looked at her with pity and confusion were now waiting at the church doors with admiration in their eyes. Cameras lined the entrance, and children in white uniforms held small flags bearing the logo of her new foundation. As Amara stepped out of her car, dressed in a simple cream dress, the crowd erupted into soft applause. She smiled humbly, her heart full but steady. Inside the church, the air was warm and calm. The same stained glass windows that once cast shadows on a day of sorrow now glowed with light. Amara walked down the aisle slowly, every step echoing with purpose. She could almost hear her father's voice in her mind, both of them. Chief Adewale's steady wisdom, Femi's soft strength. Together, they had taught her what love, sacrifice, and truth really meant. When she reached the altar, she turned to face the audience. The hall was packed, politicians, businessmen, journalists, and ordinary villagers who had once whispered her name in doubt. But now, their faces were filled with pride. She looked at them all, then at the children sitting in the front row, children from orphanages her foundation had rescued and given new homes. Her throat tightened with emotion, but her voice was calm when she spoke. Months ago, she began, I stood right here, broken and lost. I thought I had lost everything, my father, my family, even my own identity. But the truth showed me something else. It showed me that love doesn't die with lies, it grows through them. My fathers both fought for something bigger than themselves. They fought for me. And now, I fight for every child who feels forgotten, unloved, or unwanted. Her words filled the hall like music. Some people wiped tears from their eyes. Others nodded in silent agreement. Amara raised her hand slightly, her voice stronger now. No child should ever grow up not knowing where they come from, she said. Every child deserves to be seen, to be loved, and to be told the truth, no matter how hard it is. The crowd stood and applauded. The sound was thunderous, echoing through the old walls of the church. Femi watched from the front row, his eyes full of pride. Amara smiled through her tears, realizing that she was no longer the girl who stood in the rain beside a coffin. She was the woman who had turned pain into purpose, the daughter who rebuilt two broken empires into one heart that now beat for others. The evening sky was painted with shades of gold and purple as the sun slowly dipped behind the hills. Amara stood on the balcony of her home, the cool breeze brushing against her face. The world had finally calmed after months of chaos. Her foundation was growing, her mother had returned safely, and peace was slowly finding its way back into her heart. As she turned to go inside, her assistant walked up quietly and handed her a small envelope. It was sealed with a golden wax crest, the same one her late father, Chief Adewale, used on his letters. Her heart skipped a beat. With trembling hands, she broke the seal and unfolded the note inside. The handwriting was familiar, bold, careful, and full of warmth. It read, "Now that you know who you are, never forget, both of us loved you enough to die for you." Amara's eyes filled with tears. She pressed the letter to her chest, feeling as if both her fathers were right there with her, one who had raised her, and one who had given her life. For so long, she had felt torn between them, trapped between two names, two truths, two worlds. But now, she finally understood. Their love had never been about secrets, it had been about protection, sacrifice, and hope. As the last ray of sunlight touched her face, Amara smiled through her tears. She whispered softly, "I love you both." The wind seemed to carry her words away, as if delivering them to the heavens. For the first time, her heart felt whole. She was no longer divided, she was the bridge that united two legacies, two fathers, and one beautiful truth: she was loved beyond measure.